So about every year in the U.S., around 4,000 to 5,000 people are killed in work-related injuries. That has lasted and been the case for about 35 years, since the 90s. There have been about 5,000 work-related fatalities in the U.S. a year. Globally, that number is significantly higher. Some claim it up to, I think it was 3 million globally. Now, out of that, I think I was reading a thing from an International Bureau of Statistics was 2.6 of that was like diseases captured at work. But that's still globally something in the realm of 400,000 work-related deaths every year. And that number has largely been unchanged in the last 30 years. It's not going down. And so today, the podcast for the TapRooT podcast, we're going to be talking about serious injury and fatalities and what is causing these to be stagnant. How do you figure them out? And really, where do we go from? How do we get that number down? So I think it's a good place to start is to think about that number of being about 5,000 people in the U.S. a year. Joining me today, I've got Ken. And Ken, what makes the difference between something being a SIF and a non-SIF injury?
Well, you can go in both directions. If between a SIF and a non-SIF, it really depends on a lot of different definitions that are floating around out there. What do you consider a significant injury? Obviously, a fatality is that's a pretty easy line to draw at that point. Serious injury really depends on how you define your injuries, and companies have different bars that they've set for those. I know there's some definitions out there that people are trying to standardize on. I know when I talk to customers, I don't think anybody has a real standardized between customers, between different companies. I haven't really seen anything that hits me as a standardized definition, but usually it involves obviously a loss of function of a limb or of your person. A lot of people also just focus on the physical piece, but there's mental pieces that can also be thrown into the SIFs if people really want to start stirring the pot up and putting things in. So there's a lot of stuff that can fit into what you consider SIFs.
I typically hear kind of three things, which is life-ending, if someone died.
There's the fatality part.
Life-threatening, meaning they almost died, and life-altering. So if it's one of those three, it's a SIF. And the life-altering is probably the one that's the most
the gray area
on there. I think if you also add the level of potentially life-altering, potentially life-threatening.
Right. That was the other end that I was kind of looking at. Is it's you can put a definition in place that works for your company, but it's the potential piece then that really hazes that over a bit, makes it a little more less defined.
So if we wanted to start off as a business and say, why is SIF injuries different than regular? I think you have to look at two things. One, you have to have a clear guide for what life-altering and life-threatening are.
Right. You've got to kind of get rid of that gray area as much as you can.
You got to give some clear criteria. I think about in my manufacturing background, there was things about loss of limbs, fingers, amputations. Those are things that are significant when it comes to injury. And we had a lot of overhead crane work. And so this was hand cranes mostly, so hand-operated cranes. And there's a lot of these things moving heavy weights.
Sure.
And that's one of those significant potential energies is having that lifted weight.
Right.
So we want to think about setting people up, recognizing these conditions, but then what do we need to do to go beyond that? If we're looking, just recognizing we're in a SIF condition, how does that help us prevent these issues?
Well, if you don't even know what a SIF condition is, it's going to be hard to recognize when you're getting in that direction, and then anything that you can put in place to avoid it. So So as you mentioned, you first got to define what the SIF is, and then kind of look at your company and figure out where those energies at that will get you into that. And you were talking about your manufacturing background, and I don't know your plants, but you've got lifts. You can probably imagine in your head, what are those energies that I'm worried about? And it's probably things like lifting. I get that. You got high speed equipment that's running out there with rotating equipment and high speed CNC machines and things like that. Those are probably things you want to keep your fingers out of, right? So there's some of those energies that are out there. And I think each business can probably, especially well-defined businesses, and what I mean by that are very unique kind of businesses where you manufacture a certain product or something like that. It's probably easier to identify where those high energy, high potential kind of areas are that you can start focusing on.
Now, there was a back and forth that I saw a few years back that was looking at, can you even recognize where your next fatality is going to come from? And there was two camps to this, which is, and I'll say these are the classic camp, which was the behaviorists. And there was this other camp that was the, we'll call them new view people, but that's not really what they were. But you kind of had the new camp versus the behaviorist camp. And the behaviorists were, well, we can recognize what kinds of behaviors could result in failure and look for those. And some in the new view kind of pushed this back and said, well, that's based on the Heinrich pyramid. And for those that don't know the Heinrich pyramid, it was basically an insurance company that he worked for insurance and recognized that, one fatality might have had 29 non-significant injuries. There might be 3,000 incidents that didn't have. It's kind of this layered. There's behaviors, and there's lots of these bad behaviors, and some of those could lead to fatalities. If we prevent these behaviors, we'll prevent the fatalities.
Right.
It was never meant as a cure-all or as if we just stop all these, it's going to stop. Like, it's not that every action could always lead to a SIF.
It's more of an observation of what's there is kind of what it was.
It's really what it was. But people took it and did lots of
research and...
they made a lot of assumptions with it. It's like, then if we can just prevent these behaviors, we'll prevent all these injuries. And the two camps were going back and forth. And to me, I think there is a good argument that we're really blind to the kind of things in our industry that will kill us. Not that we're blind to everything that would kill us.
Sure.
A lot of stuff is easily recognizable. But in the moment, most people don't recognize they're in a potential SIF position.
Right.
So,
you get used to stuff pretty quickly. I get asked all the time, hey, you're on a submarine. Boy, that must have been really dangerous stuff. And you think to yourself back looking at it, we did stuff all the time that a non-submarine person would say, well, that's dangerous. And you think, well, I do that every day. So it's really difficult for someone who's always in that position to recognize when you've got those kind of hazards floating around out there.
And there's a lot of times that the hazard is not actually in place. So like you don't recognize it's in place. I think to the Texas City, the safety team is having a briefing in the trailer. They're not thinking that there's this potential energy buildup, that there's this process safety problem occurring.
Right next door.
And in hindsight, it's obvious that you've put something next to something dangerous in here. And, had we had 2020, foresight, we could have realized these problems. But there's a lot of times in the moment, people don't recognize they're even in these positions.
Right. That's where I have a problem sometimes when I hear, well, just get a bunch of smart people together and they'll figure it all out. Well, the smart people are probably the people in those positions, and it's really difficult to kind of step back away from that. It can be you got blind spots that are kind of built into your own psyche.
Yeah, and we get comfortable. So there's a term for risk. You basically get more comfortable with it over time. The people that are I watch these videos of they're doing mountain biking on the edge of a mountain, right?
I've seen those.
It's like
doing these jumps and just little tiny trails.
Anytime you see Red Bull on a can in the picture shot, somebody's about to do something that is risky, but also interesting. So you can see these moments happening, and my brain goes, that's just dangerous. Actually, I was hiking this morning with my son and his class in a field trip through a local nature center we have here in Knoxville. And we were talking as we were going about, there was a boy behind going, I don't want to be safe. That's not fun. And so he's in the back saying that, and I was walking with my son, and I was just thinking about, I was like, that's the kind of mindset some people have. Their risk tolerance is just really high. Yeah. And so they might recognize that it's dangerous.
Right, that's the next level, is you actually recognize it and do it anyway.
Yeah, they're comfortable with that risk because they think it's not going to happen to me. Right. It'll happen to some people, but it won't happen to me. Right. And I think those are the kind of things that, as a business, you have to recognize not everyone has the same risk tolerance as your business.
Yeah, those are the two different sides of kind of what you were mentioning before about what is SIF, and do we recognize? I get the Texas City group who, while they're doing their brief, they don't even recognize there is a hazard right there. They don't see it, but you've got little Johnny there saying, I like walking across ropes over top of cliffs because I like that. I'm immune to it, or I'm used to it. So there's the ones that don't even recognize, and then there's the ones that do recognize and say, well, that's okay. And I think those two sides have to be attacked separately. It's not the same thought process that you're looking at. One is you're trying to recognize a hazard, and the other you're trying to change the behaviors when you do recognize a hazard.
Yeah, and a lot of people believe it's back and forth sometimes. You think like, workers don't intend to get hurt. Everybody would generally agree with that, except for the ones that do. But the majority don't want to get hurt. But also a lot of them, it's not that they don't want to take risks. I think lots of people are willing to take risks. They just don't actually have a accurate understanding of what's the likelihood and consequences, but also likelihood. Mm-hmm. It's like, well, I know I might get hit by a car if I run across this road, but I mean, I haven't gotten hit so far. It's not common. Cars don't generally drive down on this road, but then when they do, they drive really fast.
I think a railroad accidents where there's people getting hit by a train, it is really easy to avoid that. You just don't walk where the tracks are, right? It's really easy, and yet people don't recognize either the likelihood or the consequence. Well, I guess I would recognize the consequences if I asked. If you get hit by a train, is that good? They'll recognize that's not good, but the likelihood of getting hit by a train, obviously in their minds, is very, very low. And yet it happens every day. People getting hit by trains. It blows my mind that people are still getting hit by trains nowadays.
and again, they're not like they're jumping.
No. There's
very clear path.
When I first came to Knoxville, there was a story out of a group. They were sunbathing. It's a nice clear area on the tracks. It was a place to lay. And one of them lost a limb, if I remember right, was a result of that. And yet that's that risk tolerance. It's not a recognized. I mean, if you ask her if you get by a train, is that okay? She'll say no, but apparently she didn't think the likelihood was very high.
So if we look at these kind of different events, we can recognize that there are incidents that have a higher probability of being life-threatening than others. Mm-hmm. A paper cut has the potential to be more, but is very unlikely. Sure. I mean, the worst thing I remember is we had a paper cut to the eyeball. That's about as drastic of a paper cut as you're going to get. Yep. But
makes me cringe just thinking about
it. It's not a fun one. But out of all the paper cuts, it's not the one you want. So it's like there is a severity with that, but the likelihood and probability was very low. Yeah. No one else I've ever heard has had a paper cut to the eyeball incident. Comment below if you have.
So I'm thinking you probably didn't institute eye protection sitting at your desk, just in case, right? That's probably
that was a serious conversation that was had at the facility for that. But so you can recognize there are some that don't have that potential, but then if you look at, we're driving vehicles, you've got forklifts or other heavy vehicles. Now you've got a high probability of energy. I remember watching the Hallowell video, and they had done research about this 1,500 joules of energy, and it was like anything that had 1,500 joules could potentially be a SIF, and I don't know a single operator that could calculate that, nor is that probably a thing you would do unless you were doing maybe some process safety or more of a design
or research.
But the idea was like, okay, there's a threshold, and anything that's outside of that, like below that threshold, is probably not our big concern.
There were some NIOSH calculators that did those kinds of things, calculated how much energy for a certain height above the ground with a certain mass, things like that.
Yeah, and I think, in general, there's rules of thumb. So like when I've talked with people about this, the thinking behind it, you want to have something like, okay, if I've got any suspended load, that's pretty much, if I have to use a crane to lift it,
I don't need to calculate it.
Yeah, it's dangerous. Yeah. It's going to be severe, life altering. But then there's other things that I would never have thought of. One of the incidents that I remember, there was a maintenance guy pushing a cart, just pushing a hand cart. And instead of having his hands in the grip position on the hand cart, it was this big toolbox, and he had his hand on the side, and he was pushing it along, and it just drifted slightly off path and caught one of his knuckles on an edge of a metal table, and just the force there caused that injury.
Yeah.
And he lost a finger because of that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so you wouldn't think pushing a cart was a highly severe injury potential activity, but it was. And there's lots of different things like that people just don't recognize the pinch points. They don't recognize the forces behind this heavy tool cabinet that he's pushing along. Yep. And so those are the kind of things that how do you set that recognition level for people?
Yeah. I think a lot of that is, and this is some of the discussion that goes into why we plateaued where we have, is the thinking, and I'm not sure I'm 100% behind this. So thinking is, well, we've hit all the normal stuff. It's all the weird stuff now. The guy just pushing a cart and he gets his hand caught. That's just weird. That's low probability. So some of that stuff is just going to happen, and there's not much you can do about it. And that's some of the thinking about these plateaus that we've hit. As we've gotten better and better and gotten our injury rates down, we're kind of stuck here. And that's one of the thought processes is out there. I'm not sure I'm 100% behind that.
Yeah, I would probably argue that's because it's not like falls have gone away on the OSHA, the scoreboard, if
Those
you will.
things are still there.
The dashboard's pretty clear, like amputations still occur. And amputations are one that, it could come as a surprise to people. Mm-hmm. But, fall from heights, it's rare that you were just sitting in your chair and suddenly fell through the floor. Right. That does happen.
It can.
But that's not the number one cause of people being, it's the kind of things like working from a ladder, working at an edge, even if it's a blocked off edge, but working at an edge of a building. Right. Like, they're clearly dangerous activities.
That's not something that I wouldn't have recognized or said, oh, I didn't realize that was a problem. These aren't the weird ones that we're still working on. Yep. At some point, I'm sure we'll hit a plateau where it's just, a meteor strike. Okay, so that's going to happen sometimes. That's just not much you're going to do about that. But that's not where we're at yet. I just don't think we're there.
Yeah, and there's only one recorded case of a woman being hit by a meteor strike.
And she survived.
She got a bruise. It's a wicked bruise, but it was a bruise. Yeah. So I think there's definitely these two sides of it. I would agree with you, though. I don't think I would focus on the obscure stuff.
Right.
But I would say there's a lot of known risks that if we perfected, preventing falls from ladders, that would do a big chunk. It would do a big chunk to actually lower this down and get away from 5,000.
Someday we'll be at that low plateau, but I just don't think
when we hit that point, then
we'll have to change our thinking.
We'll have to change our thinking again to deal with the completely unknown unknowns. Now, another kind of thought-provoking statement around this, when we look at the amount of activity, so how much effort should be put into working on SIFs versus other types of recordable injuries? So, example, other types of recordables might be sprains, might be back injury, arthritis, kind of those kind of ergonomic type issues where, yes, it's probably not going to result in a fatality, but it might end up being life altering. I mean, arthritis is not a, it's long-term life altering, but
and it doesn't it's not acute. It doesn't happen today. It's a long-term kind of thing. It takes some time.
And I've seen people pull their back lifting heavy things, but also,
putting on their shoes.
Yes, put on your shoes. There's the I slept wrong yesterday and hurt my back. I'm getting in there. I'm getting in there now.
I'm there. I'm already there.
But those kind of things, how much time should a company dedicate to one or the other? If you asked leadership, how many recordables would you trade for a fatality or a SIF? Like, is there a number?
Yeah, I don't know if I got a good answer for that. I don't think the answer is concentrate on one or the other. I don't think that's the right answer. I think they're both there, and you can't just say, well, SIFs are more life-threatening and more significant, therefore I'm going to ignore these other things over here. So I don't think you can just draw a line and say that's where I'm going to stop looking and trying to fix things. I think you got to work on both. I think this is a great, what I would call an annual, or what I'll call it annual, but it's whatever, where you do an annual review at the end of the year and say, so how did we do this year? Where do we need to shift our focus for the next year? And you might do that in October to start getting your 2026 goals ready to go. But I think you're just going to shift where that line is a little bit and how much you're dedicating on each end of that line.
Yeah, and you can't completely eliminate. If you're spending your efforts on the recordable kind of stuff, you're missing opportunities for prevention. And I think there has to be a good balance. It's probably should be more SIF than recordable. But because if you're doing a really good job at the SIF, you're probably going to also be doing a good job at the other
That's
side
probably
of it.
true. Probably
so
true.
That's maybe
it's hard to pull it away if you're not doing both. Although I can look at it both ways. I mean, I can see if I'm doing a really good on the recordables, it should be hopefully hitting a lot of that SIF stuff also. That's why I think it's I don't know if that's really a great question, is to try to figure out how much effort to expend on either one. I think it's, I think you just as a company need to decide where your priorities are, and that can be based on many different things, whatever your KPIs are, and do you have the right KPIs, and you're looking at the right things. So it's a tough one to answer. I don't know.
It could be also that you spend time and you think of, okay, what is I'm only going to be able to prevent SIFs as a potential. So what are the things and activities that I could do that prevent potentials of these energies or potential SIFs? And you're probably going to spend your daily work activities being more toward those minor injuries. Sure. And so there's a we'll probably film something about ready to start versus in control of energy, but these other areas that we look at, how do we protect people versus the preventative measures that either keep people safe but also prevent minor harms. I think like gloves have a double purpose. It might be a shallow cut on your hand that's protected by a glove, but it also could be a laceration that would have taken a finger off. Yep. And or an impact that would have shattered a finger. So there you kind of can get both. So I
think so too. That's where I think you are.
But there's a difference between an ergonomic mat for resting my legs while I'm working versus that's probably never going to kill. Yes, they could slip and bust their head. They could.
But again, that likelihood thing is what you're looking at here.
And so there's definitely a balance that needs to happen, and companies are going to have to figure out what level they need to apply this.
Yep.
Now, if somebody wanted to learn some techniques for identifying SIF potential, what kind of things do we talk about in TapRooT that help people identify significant injury?
Yeah,
potential?
we have quite a bit we talk about, especially in our 5-day course. We talk about the energies and safeguards. Kind of, we have different terms for different pieces of that, but our safeguard analysis and energy identification piece of the course is a good start there.
And we've been teaching energy theory since the 90s.
Long before I got here. I've been here over 20 years now, and there's different words for it out there now. There's different tools out there to help a little bit with it, but the theory hasn't changed. It's the same stuff.
Yes.
We also look. I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
We also look a little bit on the corrective action side too. While it's a little bit different than SIF, no matter what you're trying to fix, if you're putting crappy corrective actions in place, you're not fixing either of those, either the less serious or the more serious problems. So we talk about how to control energy a little bit with our and safeguards with our corrective action program that you put in place.
And so our 2-day just roughly touches on what is a hazard, what are safeguards, what is the target, and how do we prevent those issues with safeguard analysis. But the 5-day does really go into prevention and proactive, because we cover how to look at proactive analysis of an incident. And I think one of the interesting things that we do is we look at something that is technical, that's generally outside of most of the people that attend training. So we take an example that's a technical example that's outside of most people's comfort zone, but we show how even a non-expert can recognize things, recognize conditions, and come up with strategies that would have prevented a major accident.
Right. Even something you're not familiar with.
Even non-experts could come in and use simple tools to identify and prevent major problems.
Yep.
So I think it's important that people spend time to learn these things. I know our 5 days is a great place to get some foundational knowledge on that. If you want to learn more, you can check out the links below for TapRooT 5 days. We have Publix, and we can come on site to do them. As always, there are lots of other interesting videos that we've covered on topics like energy. And so make sure you subscribe and hit the notification bell so you hear the next upcoming ones. And we'll see you again at the next TapRooT podcast.